from a cinematography standpoint, The Favourite has always intrigued me. I mean, if we take a look at Yorgos Lanthimos' other films, they were all photographed in a rather normal way. We do have the occasional ultra-wide angle, but in general, these films look quite good, but a bit average. And there's nothing wrong with that. But then we get to The Favourite, and immediately we have a different style. Now, yes, he was working with Robbie Ryan, but this is a period drama that has pretty much fisheye shots, which, if anything, just made me happy to see. Now, in today's video, I want to look at 1. Why they took this route, but also how they took it, by looking at the equipment Ryan used, as well as what went into the lighting and composition. Then I'll also have a look at the look, and what influenced Lanthimos and Ryan. Could it really be a film set in the 1700s if it weren't shot on film? Well, yes, it could, but sometimes you just need to be as authentic as you can, and Ryan was here, shooting the film not only on film, but also with imperfect vintage lenses. As for the cameras, Ryan opted for the Aricam LT, Aricam ST, and Panavision Panaflex Millennium XL2, an interesting selection, but a solid one nonetheless. The LT and ST are pretty much brothers, as they are very similar variations of each other, the ST being a more studio camera perfect for a more generic film setting with sticks and dollies, and the LT being the more lightweight version, optimal for handheld work. The Millennium XL2, however, is the gold standard of film cameras today, and seemed to be the primary camera here, so if you were going to go with just one brain, this is it. When it comes to the lenses, however, Ryan went vintage, using Panavision's P Vintage and Nikon's Nikkor lenses. Now, the P Vintages are based on Panavision's Ultra Speeds, and they deliver some of the best mechanical performance on the market, and paired with a smooth organic image, relatively low T-stop across the range, even going down to T1 at 50, and of course that vintage look. So, the Nikkors. This is an interesting lens to see on this magnitude. However, not many other companies make 10 or 6mm lenses, and these are sort of what make the cinematography of this film so memorable, in one aspect anyway. Because what other period drama can you think of that goes this wide? However, Ryan also mentions a practical reason for going this wide, so it wasn't all about visual style. If we're shooting everything on a 25 or 50, you'd be bouncing all over the place. It wouldn't look great. The 10mm is very forgiving in the camera movement. Finally, touching on the stock Ryan used, it's the usual suspects. Kodak's Vision 350D, 200T and 500T, a range that covers everything you could need, and it's Kodak, so you know you are getting a solid stock. So instead of wasting time here, let's move on to the more interesting stuff. Now, I want to say that Ryan had a lot of influence on the lighting of this film, and was ordering 18Ks to windows and bounces all around the frame, but that simply isn't true, as this film is basically natural light. That's it. Now, this wasn't because Ryan thought he didn't need to light, as usually whilst he does utilise natural light, he often does so with balance from artificial light. However, as Lanthimos isn't a fan of using artificial light unless he absolutely needs the exposure, they just went without. It was amazing to see how the film started out with very bright windows backlighting an actress, and then seeing that the faces were still exposed, and they were, in effect, even more beautiful. I learned a lot about the value of not using anything. So what are some of the positives of using just natural light? Well, for one, you save on setup time, and you could look at this in one of two ways. Either you shoot less days, or you spend more time getting the right performance. Maybe not Fincher levels, as you then need to get rid of the camera for that, but you could still spend a bit more time with the actors and make sure that it's perfect. Now, the other aspect is that it creates this organic atmosphere that whilst you could create artificially, as we saw in Barry Lyndon, it would be extremely difficult and time consuming to do so, especially with all of the huge floor-to-ceiling windows. One of the things that I was interested in was the architecture of this world and how people moved from one room to the other and how big those rooms felt. So, about composition. Now, when you can't control the lighting as much, it's one of those things that you have to rely on to make the image look interesting. Now, it's a bit easier when your film is set in a stunning Jacobean house, Hatfield House to be specific, because then you can sort of go wide, centre the frame, and have an incredible looking image. But obviously more thought goes into it. One interesting note though is no matter the character, we are often looking up at people, which for a film involving a queen is a peculiar choice, as it shows that they are almost of equal power to her, even if they are several social classes below. However, what's more interesting is looking at the framing of a scene when the sides are distorted, which actually happens a lot more than I thought in this. Now, to me, it feels as though Ryan has gone into a space where we can see the majority of the surroundings and then just lets the scene play out, but it just so happens that they're usually in the centre of the frame. We talked about how to use framing that can make you focus more on one person than another, in spite of using wide-angle lenses and including multiple people in the frame, and how to do that with movement as well. The look of The Favourite is raw. The way it's lit, the way it's framed, the way we watch these characters is raw, and in the way of creating a look in post, they went as far as to add some contrast, and that was about it. Yorgos doesn't really like pushing the grades too far anyway. I think he's very fond of the film the way it is, pretty much out of the box. However, I want to look at the influence behind Ryan. What are the films that he looked towards to create the final version that we see? Well, as a surprise to no one, Bergman is in there with Cries and Whispers. However, so is Possession, a psychological horror film from the 80s. Now, both of these films are photographed in a really interesting way, which is exactly what they were after. Taking a look at Cries and Whispers, for example, the use of colour and composition is something we can see in parts of The Favourite, with whole scenes covered by a shade of green, blue or gold, and then central framing. But when it comes to Possession, the abstract angles and camera movement is something that we can see replicated in Ryan's work. Basically, we wanted to be inspired by people who had made bold and interesting choices, whether or not they were actually similar films. So what did Robbie Ryan actually do on The Favourite? Well, he went classic with his lighting, using the most organic source you can get, managed to frame it in a way that feels fresh even though this is an age-old genre, and when it comes to the grading and overall look, he's proven that you don't need to do much to make it look great, and in doing all of this, he's photographed one of the most memorable period dramas in recent memory. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Not if you did, if you have a recommendation for an analysis, leave it down below. Thanks so much for watching and maybe I'll see you next time. Bye!